What if the greatest invention of the 20th century came too early? Imagine telegrams replaced by instant messages. Imagine the front lines of World War I, live-streamed. Imagine governments, not just building bombs, but fighting over broadband. In our world, the internet was born in the 1960s, raised in the 90s, and took over everything by the 2000s. But what if the internet had existed in 1914, right on the brink of the First World War? Would it have stopped the war, or made it worse? Would empires have crumbled faster, or lasted longer? Would we have seen the rise of democracy, or the surveillance state 100 years early? This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a deep dive into a reality that could have been. Because once you change when the internet is born, you change everything. To reimagine the world in 1914 with the internet, we first have to imagine what that internet would look like. No smartphones, no Wi-Fi, no Silicon Valley. Instead, massive room-sized machines, vacuum tubes, electromechanical switches, wires strung between war rooms and telegraph posts. This isn't TikTok and memes. This is code written on paper. A network built by scientists, soldiers, and spies. Let's say the groundwork was laid in the 1890s. Pioneers like Charles Babbage, Ada Lovelace, and Nikola Tesla pushed the boundaries of computation and wireless power. And by 1910, a coalition of engineers in Britain, Germany, and the United States create the world's first global digital network. They call it the grid. Text-based, slow, but revolutionary. Governments use it to communicate across oceans. Bankers begin moving money between continents in milliseconds. And ordinary people, at least the wealthy ones, can send messages without waiting days for delivery. But just as this fragile new network begins to spread, war erupts. It's July 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand has just been assassinated in Sarajevo. But this time, the news doesn't take days to ripple through embassies and capitals. It travels through the grid. Within minutes, Vienna knows, Berlin knows, London knows, Paris knows. The web of alliances tightens not over weeks, but hours. Mobilizations begin faster. Troop orders are issued through encrypted grid channels, and propaganda, raw, emotional, nationalistic, is shared in real time. But so is dissent. Anti-war protests aren't confined to leaflets and street corners. They spread across the network. Voices of artists, students, and pacifists echoing louder than ever before. For the first time in history, war isn't just fought on the battlefield. It's fought in the inbox, in message boards, in digital dispatches that cross enemy lines. Soldiers at the front send coded messages home. Spouses and lovers send back prayers and politics. The world becomes more connected and more divided than ever before. The grid was meant to bring people together. Instead, it accelerates the greatest conflict the world has ever seen. By 1915, the war has dug in. Trenches stretch from the North Sea to Switzerland. But behind the lines, a new kind of war is brewing. A war of information. Censorship becomes standard. Governments monitor every message. Search algorithms, primitive but effective, track phrases like mutiny, defeat, and revolution. In Germany, military leaders flood the grid with disinformation campaigns, spreading false reports of Allied defeats. In Britain, the Admiralty seeds fake naval victories to keep morale high. Both sides build signal corps, not just to break codes, but to hack, intercept, and manipulate enemy communication. The grid is no longer neutral. It's a battlefield. The Christmas truce of 1914? In this timeline, it never happens. Attempts to organize ceasefires over the network are detected, traced, and punished. Deserters are tracked through their grid logins. Entire units are disciplined for sharing defeatist content. And yet, some messages still slip through. Letters from poets, whispers of revolution, footage, grainy but real, of the horrors of the trenches, shared between soldiers across enemy lines. The truth becomes harder to kill than bullets, and that terrifies those in power. In our world, the First World War ended in 1918. But the crumbling of empires took years, sometimes decades. In this timeline, it happens faster. The grid accelerates collapse. As the war drags on, information leaks from the front lines. Not just casualty numbers, but photos, reports, eyewitness accounts. Images of frostbitten soldiers, starving civilians, entire villages reduced to rubble. All transmitted across a network no government can fully control. And at home, the people are watching. They don't wait for newspapers. They read dispatches from their own sons, their neighbors, their former classmates. Dissent spreads like wildfire. The Russian Revolution doesn't begin in whispers. It explodes. Encrypted channels let Bolsheviks organize faster. The Tsar's regime crumbles under a digital storm of rebellion. In Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, nationalist groups connect across borders. Minorities organize. Rebellions that once would have died in isolation now feed off each other, linked by the grid. By 1917, 3 empires have collapsed. The power vacuum left behind is deeper and more chaotic than anything we've seen in our own history. The world is more connected, but also more fragile. Because when everything moves faster, so does collapse. The grid was supposed to be a miracle, a triumph of human ingenuity. But governments, having seen its power, now want to control it. Post-war democracies and dictatorships alike turn to the same conclusion. No regime can survive without mastering the network. And so, the first surveillance states are born. Every login tracked, every message scanned, every citizen profiled, not by who they are, but by what they write, read, and share. In Germany, the shattered Weimar Republic builds an early digital monitoring bureau. Its files, stored in humming underground databanks, grow by the millions. In Britain, Parliament authorizes the Signal Office Act, granting near-total control over public communications in the name of stability. And in the US, the FBI partners with private telecom companies to quietly monitor suspicious content. Terms like anarchist, communist, and organizer trigger automated alerts. Privacy becomes a memory. Freedom of speech becomes conditional. And the network that once promised liberation becomes a tool of control. But here's the twist. The people don't resist. Not yet. Because the grid still connects them, still distracts them, still gives them the illusion of freedom, while quietly redrawing the boundaries of power. In our world, the 1930s gave rise to totalitarianism. Fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, Stalinism in the Soviet Union. But in this alternate timeline, the rise is faster and more sophisticated. Because by the 1930s, those who seek power aren't just mastering speeches or symbols. They're mastering the grid. Imagine Mussolini with a propaganda dashboard. Imagine Hitler with real-time analytics of public sentiment. Imagine Stalin monitoring every digital whisper, every unsigned post, every anonymous file share. The dictators of this era don't just rule with fear. They rule with data. Propaganda isn't printed on paper. It's inserted into the grid's trending pages, auto-generated, targeted, tailored to each class, each region, each insecurity. The illusion of choice becomes the new form of control. Radio broadcasts are augmented by live streams. Public executions are filmed and embedded in state channels. Dissent is preempted by predictive behavior models. It's not just a police state. It's a predictive state. A regime that doesn't need to wait for opposition, because it can spot it coming. By 1936, the first AI-assisted surveillance algorithm is in use by the NKVD. It flags language patterns that hint at disloyalty, cross-references grid activity with location logs, and quietly removes threats before they rise. The dictators of this world don't burn books. They rewrite search results. And then, it happens again. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. But this time, the world doesn't learn of it through newspapers. It watches, almost live. Grainy footage from the Polish grid, messages pleading for help, images of tanks rolling through village roads. Within hours, the world knows. But what does it do? Because information doesn't always lead to action. As the war spreads, the grid becomes a double-edged sword. Yes, it informs, but it also deceives. Deepfake technology, crude but powerful, emerges by 1942. Footage is forged. Leaders' voices are mimicked. Entire uprisings are quashed through manufactured confusion. Winston Churchill's real speeches compete with forged ones. Resistance groups coordinate across occupied Europe. But so do Gestapo traps, posing as allies. The allies fight to secure code breakers. But now they're also fighting to secure data centers. Servers the size of buildings. Data vaults beneath bunkers. Networks stretched under oceans. The Battle of Britain isn't just in the skies. It's in the signal towers and fiber lines. In packets of code racing to decode Germany's next move. And Hiroshima? In this world, the nuclear bomb isn't the only threat. There's also a virus, a piece of code developed in secret by the US, designed to shut down the Axis grid in one blow. They call it Operation Silence. When it deploys in 1945, Nazi communications crash, bank records vanish, military orders vanish. The German home front falls into chaos, not from bombs, but from disconnection. World War II ends, not just with a bang, but with a blackout. The bombs stopped falling, but the war didn't end. Not really. Because by 1947, a new conflict takes shape. Not of missiles, but of mainframes. The Cold War begins. In code. The United States and the Soviet Union both emerge from the wreckage of World War II with one truth etched into their strategies. Control the grid. Control the world. And so begins a silent arms race. Not just for nuclear warheads, but for network dominance. Soviet engineers race to build RedLink, a closed-loop grid that rivals the West's global node. Both sides erect digital walls, firewalls, designed to keep information in and foreign influence out. Espionage goes digital. Spy rings aren't just found in alleyways or embassies. They're lurking in code libraries, hiding inside firmware updates, masquerading as harmless messages in obscure corners of the net. In 1956, the Suez Crisis is broadcast to both Soviet and American audiences, but with radically different narratives. The world doesn't fracture along geography anymore. It fractures by feed. Misinformation becomes weaponized. Memes and headlines, primitive by modern standards, are deployed like leaflets dropped from drones. By the 1960s, cyber attacks replace sabotage. Data vaults are bombed from afar with packets instead of payloads. Stock markets shudder temporarily not from crisis, but from virus. Meanwhile, average citizens navigate a world where truth feels more like a design choice than a shared reality. Each side believes it is winning. Each side watches the other's grid obsessively. And every so often, a crisis, Cuba, Berlin, Vietnam, brings the digital Cold War within seconds of turning hot. And still, the grid grows, sprawling, silent, shaping thought more than any politician could. The most powerful weapon of the Cold War isn't the hydrogen bomb, it's the algorithm. Fast forward to today, or rather, to our alternate today. The year is 2024. The grid is no longer a tool. It's the air we breathe. Every thought, every purchase, every relationship lives on a platform. Each one curated, tracked, scored. Children grow up with digital IDs, their behaviors monitored from birth. Not by their parents, but by the state. Democracy? Still alive, technically. But campaigns are now run by predictive models, not speeches. Voting systems are gamified. Public opinion can be nudged, warped, even inverted with a few lines of well-timed code. Freedom of thought? Available, if you know where to find it. In the encrypted corners of the old grid, where the original builders left open doors. But most people don't look. They scroll, they consume, they adapt. Because in this world, the biggest threat isn't tyranny. It's comfort. Comfort with being watched. Comfort with being nudged. Comfort with letting the machine decide what you want, what you need, what you believe. The grid was humanity's greatest invention, but in inventing it too soon, before laws, before ethics, before understanding, we may have traded freedom for connection. So here's the question. If the internet had been born in 1914, would we be more advanced? Or just more controlled? Because in this world, information didn't set us free. It just learned how to own us. History isn't just shaped by what happens. It's shaped by when it happens. If the internet had arrived in 1914, before we were ready, before we understood the cost of instant connection, the world might look eerily familiar, but fundamentally different. Because technology doesn't automatically make us wiser. It just amplifies who we already are. In this alternate timeline, we built the future too soon. Without the guardrails of experience, without the maturity to wield it well. And that's the truth most histories won't tell you. The greatest leap forward can also be the greatest fall. So the next time we invent something world-changing, whether it's AI, quantum networks, or something we can't yet name, we have to ask not just, can we build it? But, are we ready for what it will change? Because the past is full of second chances, but the future, it only gives us one. If this video opened a door in your mind, if it made you rethink not just the past, but the choices we're making right now, then hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who still thinks tech is always progress. Because history isn't over. And neither is the story of what we choose to create next. This is where imagination meets the past and quietly warns the present.